Daniel Carter never imagined that a simple trip to a car dealership would become the moment that quietly changed his life. It began on a cold November morning in Portland, Oregon. The sky was gray, and the air carried the kind of chill that made people walk faster, heads down, focused only on getting through the day. Daniel had just parked his truck when he saw Laura Bennett standing near the entrance. She wore a long beige coat, her hands tucked into her pockets, her posture calm but distant. She wasn't looking at the cars. She was looking past them, as if her thoughts were somewhere far away. Daniel stepped out and walked toward her. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and a small smile appeared on her face. It wasn't her usual warm smile. It looked tired, like someone who had learned to hide their feelings. "Good morning," she said softly. Daniel nodded and greeted her the same way, but inside, he felt something strange. He had known Laura for years. She was his wife Emily's mother. She had always been kind, always strong, always steady. But today she seemed different, more fragile, or human. They entered the dealership together, and Daniel noticed how quiet she was. Normally, Laura would make polite conversation, ask questions, and try to stay positive. But today, she simply followed him, trusting him to guide her. Daniel had offered to help her find a new car after her old one finally stopped working. Emily had been too busy to help. She had said she would try to visit her mother soon, but work kept pulling her away. Daniel didn't blame her. At least, that's what he told himself. But deep down, he couldn't ignore how easily Emily made time for everything except the people who needed her most. Inside the dealership, bright lights reflected off polished cars. A salesman greeted them, but Daniel handled most of the conversation. He asked about safety features, reliability, and price. Laura stood beside him, occasionally nodding. She looked at him with quiet trust, and Daniel felt the weight of it. He wasn't used to being depended on like this anymore. At home, Emily rarely needed him. She had her career, her schedule, her independence. Daniel often felt like a guest in his own marriage. They walked through rows of vehicles, and after some time, Laura paused beside a silver sedan. She ran her hand lightly along the door, her fingers slow and thoughtful. "This one feels right," she said. Daniel opened the door for her, and she sat inside. He sat in the passenger seat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt calm, like they didn't need words to understand each other. Laura looked at the steering wheel, her expression soft. "It's strange," she said. Daniel asked what she meant. She hesitated before answering. Starting over again at this age. Doing things alone. Her voice didn't break, but Daniel heard the loneliness behind her words. He turned toward her and said gently, "You're not alone." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something unspoken passed between them. She smiled faintly. "Thank you for being here," she said. They took the car for a test drive. Daniel explained the controls, showed her how everything worked. Laura listened carefully. She laughed once when she accidentally pressed the wrong button, and Daniel laughed with her. It was a small moment, but it stayed with him, he realized. How long it had been since he shared simple happiness with someone. After they returned to the dealership, Laura decided to buy the car. She seemed nervous, but also relieved. Daniel stayed beside her through the paperwork, answering questions, making sure she felt comfortable. When everything was finished, they walked outside together. The rain had started falling lightly. Laura looked at her new car and smiled, and this time her smile looked real. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said. Daniel shrugged, trying to keep it casual. "You could have," he replied. She shook her head. "No, I needed someone who cared enough to show up." Her words stayed in his mind long after he drove home. Life returned to its routine, but something inside Daniel had shifted. He found himself thinking about Laura more often. He thought about her strength, her quiet kindness, and the way she made him feel valued without even trying. At home, Emily was busy as always. She talked about meetings, deadlines, and travel plans. She didn't notice how quiet Daniel had become. She didn't notice the distance growing between them. Days later, Laura called him. She said she was having trouble connecting her phone to the car and asked if he could help. Daniel agreed. When he arrived at her house, she greeted him with a warm smile. Inside, her home felt peaceful but empty. He helped her fix the problem, and afterward they stood outside near the car. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Laura crossed her arms and looked at the horizon. "Do you ever feel like life didn't turn out the way you expected?" she asked. Daniel thought about it before answering. "Sometimes," she nodded slowly. "I spent so many years taking care of everyone else. I don't regret it. But now, I don't always know who I am anymore." Daniel understood. He had spent years building a life with Emily, believing they were growing together. But somewhere along the way, they had grown apart. Laura turned to him. "You're a good man, Daniel. Emily is lucky to have you." He didn't know how to respond. He wasn't sure Emily felt lucky anymore. After that evening, their conversations became more frequent. They talked about simple things: work, memories, hopes. Nothing inappropriate, nothing obvious. But each conversation built a quiet connection between them. They understood each other in ways no one else seemed to. Daniel tried to ignore it. He reminded himself who she was. He reminded himself of his responsibilities. But emotions didn't follow logic. They followed truth. And the truth was, he felt more seen by Laura than he had felt in years. One night, Daniel sat alone in his living room while Emily packed for another trip. She spoke quickly, focused on her schedule. She kissed his cheek before leaving, but it felt like a habit, not a feeling. After she left, the house felt empty. Daniel sat in silence, thinking about everything he hadn't said. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Laura. "Thank you again for helping me. I hope you know how much it meant." Daniel stared at the message. He felt warmth and guilt at the same time. Replied simply, "You're welcome." But he knew it meant more than that. Kay realized he had reached a point where nothing was simple anymore. A few days later, Laura called him again. Her voice sounded calm but careful. She asked if he would join her for coffee sometime, just to talk. Daniel hesitated. He knew he should create distance. He knew he was standing on the edge of something dangerous. But he also knew he didn't want to lose the connection they had built. He agreed. After the call ended, Daniel stood still, his heart beating faster than it should have. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know where this path would lead. But deep inside, he knew one thing for certain. That day at the dealership hadn't just been about buying a car. It had been the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Neither of them was ready for what came next. Daniel Carter arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early, but it still didn't feel early enough. His hands rested on the steering wheel, his mind filled with questions he couldn't answer. He had met Laura Bennett many times before. Family dinners, holidays, birthdays, but today felt different. Today wasn't about family. Today was about something else, something neither of them had named yet. He stepped out of the truck and saw her through the window. She sat alone at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, her eyes focused on nothing. She looked peaceful but distant, like someone carrying memories that didn't let her rest. When she noticed him walking in, her face softened. She smiled, and that smile reached her eyes. "I'm glad you came," she said. Daniel nodded as he sat down. "Me too." For a moment, they didn't speak. The silence wasn't heavy. It was honest. Laura stirred her coffee slowly, then looked at him. "I didn't call you just to talk about the car," she admitted. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had known that already, but hearing it made it real. "I know," he replied quietly. She took a deep breath. "I've been alone for a long time, Daniel. Not just physically, emotionally. After my husband left, I told myself I didn't need anyone. I focused on raising Emily. I worked, I stayed strong, and I never allowed myself to feel weak. but strength can become loneliness if you carry it too long. Daniel listened carefully. He saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was sharing something real. "I never expected you to understand me the way you do," she continued. "You listen, you care. That means more than you know." Daniel didn't trust himself to speak right away. His emotions were too close to the surface. At home, he had become invisible. Here, he was seen. "I don't know when it happened," he admitted finally. "But somewhere along the way, talking to you became the best part of my day." Laura looked down at her hands, then back at him. "That scares me," she said. "Me too," Daniel replied. They both understood why. Hours passed quickly. They talked about life, regrets, hopes they had buried. They didn't touch. They didn't cross any obvious lines. But emotionally, something had already changed. When they left the coffee shop, they walked to their cars slowly, neither wanting the moment to end. As Daniel reached his truck, Laura spoke his name. He turned. She hesitated, then said softly, "You deserve to be happy, Daniel. Don't forget that." He watched her drive away, her words echoing in his mind. At home, nothing had changed. Emily was still distant. She spent more time on her phone, more time planning trips, more time building a future that didn't seem to include him. They spoke politely, but the warmth was gone. One evening, Daniel tried to talk to her. "Do you ever feel like we've grown apart?" he asked carefully. Emily looked surprised. "I've just been busy," she said. "This is temporary." But Daniel could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Temporary had already started to feel permanent. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought about promises, loyalty, and the quiet truth in his heart. He had never planned to feel this way about Laura. He had never wanted to stand at this emotional crossroads. But feelings didn't ask permission. They arrived quietly and refused to leave. Over the next weeks, Daniel and Laura continued to see each other, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just a short conversation in her driveway. Each meeting deepened their connection. They spoke honestly. They shared things they had never told anyone else. One afternoon, as snow fell gently around them, Laura looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I feel alive again," she whispered. Daniel felt both warmth and guilt. He knew their connection was real, but he also knew it came with consequences. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said. "Neither do I," he replied. They stood there in silence, the cold air around them, the truth between them. Finally, Laura spoke the words neither of them had been ready to say. "We can't keep pretending this is nothing." Daniel nodded slowly, because it wasn't nothing. It was everything. That night, Daniel made the hardest decision of his life. He sat down with Emily. His heart pounded as he spoke. "Oh, I don't think we're happy anymore," he said honestly. Emily didn't argue. She didn't cry. Simply looked at him with quiet understanding. "I know," she admitted. Her words surprised him. "I felt it too," she continued. "We stopped being partners a long time ago." There was sadness in her voice, but also relief. Sometimes the truth didn't destroy people. Sometimes it freed them. They talked for hours. They spoke about their mistakes, their distance, and the reality they could no longer ignore. They agreed to separate peacefully, with respect for the life they had shared. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. Daniel didn't call Laura right away. He needed time to understand his own heart. He spent days alone reflecting on everything that had happened. He didn't want to replace one life with another out of loneliness. He wanted to be sure his feelings were real, and they were, because when he thought about Laura, he didn't just feel comfort, he felt hope. Weeks later, he visited her. She opened the door, surprised to see him. They stood face to face, the air filled with unspoken emotion. "I told Emily the truth," he said. Laura's eyes widened slightly, and she asked softly, We separated, he replied. She looked down, processing his words. I never wanted to be the reason, she said quietly. You weren't, Daniel assured her. The distance was already there. We just didn't admit it. Laura looked at him again, her eyes searching his face. What happens now? She asked. Daniel took a deep breath. That depends on us. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't demanding anything. He was offering truth. Laura stepped closer, her voice calm but emotional. I spent years believing love was something that only existed in the past, she said. But you reminded me that it can exist in the present too. Daniel felt his heart steady. For the first time in years, his life didn't feel uncertain. It felt open, real, possible. They didn't rush forward. They didn't pretend the past didn't matter. They simply allowed themselves to be honest about what they felt. Sometimes, love didn't arrive in the way people expected. Sometimes, it arrived quietly, after loss, after loneliness, after truth. Daniel and Laura knew their story wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone.